Yeah, Spectre. I normally go and see Bond film on its day of release, but Spectre actually been away, so I went a few days after. And my first initial impressions were I kind of enjoyed it, but there was something not quite right. Went to see it again, and although that didn't totally confirm my feelings, I think the third time I viewed it, which was fairly recently, I just think it's a little dull. I think it's a bit of a bloated mess. That's not to say there's not things that I like in it. The pre-credit sequence is enjoyable, although I'm not totally into the long take. I think it's a bit showy for a Bond film. I think it draws attention to the director, and in Bond films, the director should be in service of the Bond material. But Bond films aren't about auteur direction. We'll look at directors later on of Bond. Well, I will, and then you will if you decide to watch this, which, like I say, will probably be two people, but anyway. Yeah, so Spectre, I was really excited about Christoph Waltz, but he kind of plays the same character he always does. Love the scene where they have the Spectre meeting and a cuckoo bit. I think that's really cool. Monica Bellucci totally wasted. The actress playing Madeline Swan, Lea Seydoux, she's good. Yeah, I like that. Dave Bautista's quite good fun, but it's kind of a spin on the Odd Job character. I think that's the problem. I think Sam Mendes was a really good fit on Skyfall, but he brought in a few tribute bits, which I don't mind. But the tribute act in Spectre just goes too far. I didn't like the poster with the Connery white tux on. There's probably about a dozen references to other films. Interestingly enough, the torture bit at the end where he's got the needles going in his brain is actually, I think, don't quote me, but taken from a Kingsley Amis James Bond book called Colonel Sum, which was written in '68, and there's a bit where the James Bond character, this is one licensed by the Fleming estate, the James Bond character is tortured with needles into vital parts of his brain or his body. So that was just an interesting point. Sometimes you see that on the Bond films, they lift things from Fleming, and in this case Kingsley Amis, just looking for material. I just there's a bit where they go up to the mountain and she's in the the medical place, and it's like Secret Service and stuff like that. I just think it's just a little bloated. Nothing really stands out for me. I think Daniel's looking probably his tiredest he's looked. It just should have, I don't know, I think it was a mistake having, the whole family background thing. I was kind of excited by that, Blofeld's back, but Blofeld being his kind of, brother type figure that he's hung out with as a child, and the whole skiing instructor subplot with his kind of guardian and stuff like that. I just think it was going too far. I think when the Daniel Craig era's over, one thing that will be, it's either it's making or it's breaking, is the fact that he's never had a kind of self-contained Bond film. There's this arch plot going through every Bond film with him, which goes back to Casino Royale, and that's interesting. But what would it have been like if, Daniel Craig had just got a kind of standalone he goes and kicks ass film. Most action franchises are doing that now. Mission Impossible's got characters coming back, and it's got little arc elements in it now. Obviously the Bourne films had the whole Treadstone thing. So, Spectre, it's a lot of money spent, a lot of money up on the screen. I think it was $250 million, and it is one of the most successful films. Worldwide adjusted gross at the moment is $950 million, and it's the fourth most successful Bond film in terms of bums on seats. So obviously the Craig factor played a big part in that, but I'm just never totally into it. And the next film is Quantum of Solace, just edging Spectre out. It's short but sweet. Well, not so sweet, but if I had to pick one of those films, I'd probably rather watch Quantum of Solace more. A lot of problems with this film, principally the writer's strike. Basically, there was a writer's strike in Hollywood. The script wasn't finished, so Daniel Craig and Mark Forster, the director, will come to him, were given permission to kind of finish the script as best they could. And that's why the film's only an hour and 45 minutes long. There hasn't been a James Bond film that short and since the early 1960s. Typically, James Bond films are over 2 hours and have an epic quality to them. So quite interesting stuff on this. I think this is the one that suffers the most from like the Bourne influence. Obviously, Casino Royale had a gritty element. You could see how the Bourne films might have influenced the producers, but with this influences it with its locations, it goes to really third world locations, which I quite like. It's quite interesting, and there's a kind of third world subplot about water, which is really vague. That could be an interesting subplot. Water will be one of the most precious resources on the planet. It already is in a lot of ways, and that's just not explored. The villain, Mafio Amarak, if that's how I pronounce it, could be wrong. Yeah, he's a really good actor. He, Diving Bell and the Butterfly, he basically acts with one eye in that, if you see that film. He's really, really good actor, but it just doesn't really work as villain. He's just not imposing enough. Olga Kurylenko, again, doesn't really develop the character. I like some of Mark Forster, the director's touches. I like it when they go to different locations. They have a graphic title on the kind of ground or part of the location of where he is. There's also a scene where they're at some rogue agent's apartment. It's raining, and he's just having a conversation with M outside, and that's quite gritty. Yeah, there's a bad tribute bit. What's her name? Christ. Gemma Arterton, yeah, she gets covered in oil like Shirley Eaton golfing. I'm just like, why are you doing that? Don't rape the sacred cow Goldfinger for a cheap bit, and the character's treated cheaply in that way. It's got some gritty sequences. I like the scene with the Matteo, I can't pronounce his name, Mathis character, played by the Italian actor. I should know this. He's in Casino Royale as well. That's a really poignant scene. Musical score's okay, but it's just it's a kind of series of what they call bumps in James Bond films, where you've got an action sequence, you've got an action bump, and then you get to the next bit, and there's about 6 of them, and it just doesn't hang together. Theme song doesn't really work. Credit sequence, it's okay. Pre-credit sequence, quite a gritty car chase, but with very choppy editing. The guy who did the second unit on this is a guy called Dan Bradley, who did the Bourne films, and I think again it's showing that Bourne influence. The big problem with this is the script isn't finished, and it doesn't. Although it carries on from Casino Royale, it doesn't really develop those story threads enough, and that's why it's number 19 on my thing. A successful film at the time. Worldwide adjusted gross 765 million it would be now. It's where is it? Yeah, hold on. Yeah, it's about it's about the 10th most successful James Bond film at the box office, adjusted for inflation. Next one, number 18. It's probably one of the most bloated Bond films and ridiculous Bond films ever. I saw the pictures as a kid. I loved it, of course you do. As I get older, the more ridiculous it gets. I have got a soft spot for it. It's Moonraker. Yeah, your Roger Moore ones, basically, what happens with James Bond, it sets a trend in the 60s. In the 70s, it starts to look to other genres and follows the lead rather than leads, and it follows the Star Wars Close Encounter lead by sending James Bond into space. Just so much action in this film. It's it's basically a series of stunts. And they get a lot of tonal. I think this is where the tone really starts to go wrong with some bits. There's a great pre-credit sequence that is spoiled by introducing stupid comedy music, with Jaws flapping his wings as he falls into a tent from the sky. You've got the villain Jaws is wasted here. The main villain, I love Hugo Drax. He's one of my favourite. Some of the dialogue is hilarious by him. The girl Bond woman, Lois Charles, Holly Goodhead, is she's pretty good. She's all right. What else is there? Got a fantastic score, this film. John Barry pulls out all the stops on this and does one of his very best scores, some of the space themes. For the musicians out there, John Barry makes really amazing use of two modes, the Dorian mode and what's called the Mixolydian flat 6 mode. And the main theme, the Moonraker song, makes use of Mixolydian flat 6, and the space themes make use of the Dorian mode on this. And they're really awesome. Yeah, Shirley Bassey tune. Yeah, we haven't really talked much about Bond songs yet because they've all been not great up to now. But the Shirley Bassey, This Is a Final Bond theme. It's not one of it's not as good as Diamonds or Goldfinger, obviously not. But it is a nice song. Yeah, this is. It was a lot of fun as a kid. I still laugh at it. I still love Roger, but it's just really ridiculous. I think Roger has his most female liaisons in this film. A lot of female action for Rog in this. And there's a bit where he goes pheasant shooting. And that's a great bit, actually. Really witty. You miss Mr. Bond. Did I? Fantastic. But it's daft as a brush. Very successful film at the time at the box office. One of the big global hits that year. Its inflation adjusted gross is $785 million, and it's the 8th most successful Bond film of all time. Okay. Next one. Number 17, more daft Rog, Octopussy. Always had a soft spot for this. It used to be higher up my ranking. Last time I watched it, I wasn't as into it. It gets knocked. But I think there's a lot of good stuff in this. Got a really cool pre-credit sequence. All Time High, not the best song. Good John Barry score. Some really cool stunt work. He goes to India, really interesting location. Again, mirroring the heritage in the heritage in TV at that time. The Jewel and the Crown, the next year goes to India. But you got stuff like Brideshead Revisited. Obviously, that's not set in India, but early 80s British cinema, it starts to look to the past. It's what we do now. Invariably, when we have economic hardship, we look to our empire past. And so by going to India, it was kind of referencing that. Rog just about gets away with his age. He's got good hair dye, kind of lighter touch. Some tonal elements are dreadful. There's the bit where he tells the tiger to sit like Barbara Woodhouse, and that no one, unless you were brought up at that time, you'd know about Barbara Woodhouse sit, but if you, now when you're looking at it, young people will be like, what the fuck's that, But John Glenn, second film as director, again, still tonal problems, there's some good action sequences, but there's just bad humour placement in it. I think the stunt doubling lets it down. There's a bit with a train. And Roger's stunt doubling is really bad. But I like a lot of this. I love the bit where he goes to the auction. Let's see how badly he wants it, the Fabergé egg. Louis Jourdan, really good villain. Really good. Maud Adams, really good Bond woman. Second appearance as a Bond girl, Bond woman in a Bond film. She's good. Quite like The Henchman. There's lots of good gambling sequences, you gotta have a bit of Bond gambling. There's a lot to enjoy on this. Stephen Burkoff, he's good fun, plays a mad rogue general. And the final bit I'd pick, and I think people knock it because he dresses as a clown. There's a bit where Roger Moore dresses as a clown to disguise himself, and he goes and defuses a Bond. Don't look at what he's wearing, watch his acting, because it's some of Roger's finest work in a Bond film. He's deadly serious, and people are pulling him away from the bomb, or because they don't realise a bomb there. And the look, his acting, he gets across the fact that catastrophe is imminent, and it's a really good sequence. Again, that sequence does appear in another film, which we'll come to. So Octopussy, quite a popular film at the box office at the time. Its inflation-adjusted gross 545 million. It's the 19th most successful Bond film. Things were starting to tail off for the Bond. Rogers, this and View to a Kill. The grosses were going down. The impact of Bond, it needed freshening up. Next one, Tomorrow Never Dies. We're up to number 16. Pierce Brosnan's second foray into Bond. I'll skate over this quickly. Again, Bond had production problems. Again, it often happens. He couldn't go to Leavesden Studios. Basically, for GoldenEye, Bond built a studio. They went to a disused airfield. They turned it into a film studio. George Lucas goes, I'll have a bit of that. And the Star Wars lot take it over for the Star Wars prequels. So Bond doesn't have a studio, so he ends up in a disused Quick Save. Remember them? Quick Save warehouse to make this film. Things fall behind. They're supposed to go and shoot in Vietnam, and they end up in Thailand. The Vietnamese government won't give them permission, probably because of its politics at the time. Vietnam's still technically a communist country, but I've been there, it's less communist now. They probably didn't want this bastion of the English and global capitalism in their country. So things get behind schedule. They get in the director Roger Spottiswoode, and one of the things with Spottiswoode, he is a film editor. That was his stock in trade. He used to edit Sam Peckinpah films. He edits Straw Dogs, I think, and maybe Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Don't quote me. And he'd made a few action films like Air America and stuff like that. I actually think he does a pretty good job with this. Under a lot of pressure, he works out what to shoot and what not to shoot, and it's really slickly edited. And it's one of the shorter Bond films, but it doesn't feel like you're getting shortchanged. Again, Bond following trends. It casts Michelle Yeoh as a rival agent, and it's aping the popularity of Hong Kong cinema at the time. Basically, 1993, Hong Kong cinema goes global with Chow Yun-fat, John Woo, stuff like that. I've just belched, sorry. And it casts her. There's some dodgy slow-mo bits, but there's a lot to enjoy in this film. Pre-credit sequence is really good fun. Don't like the theme song. Don't actually like the credits design. I can't stand that Sheryl Crow song. I know some people like it. And then Pierce is good. He's filled out a bit. He's enjoying his time as Bond. Miss Moneypenny and M have a good banter with him. Jonathan Pryce is quite good fun as a villain. There's a stupid henchman played by an actor called Cots Otto. I mean, he might as well just call himself Mr. Otto. And there's a really funny bit. There's this guy, I forget the actor, he's in Ghost and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but he plays like this Dr. Kaufman. He's great. And Pierce gets a really, really cool sort of Bond being hard, professional bit where he shoots him. He says, I'm just a professional doing my job, Mr. Bond. He's like, me too, and he pops him. There's a good bit where he's waiting, actually. Pierce has got a bottle of vodka and he's waiting with his bottle of PPK with a silencer on. If you're into classic Bond images, that's a nice little touch. Cool motorbike chase, that's well handled. There's various other bits. Interesting thing about this film was its original proper title was supposed to be Tomorrow Never Lies. Tomorrow is the name of Jonathan Pryce's newspaper. The day before, or when it was due to go to press, they fucked it up and got a misprint. It says Tomorrow Never Dies, and that's why it's called that. Finally, the climax of this film, that's probably the weakest bit, the third act. There's always third act problems in Bond films. Pretty much every film we've gone through so far has third act problems. And this one is just a lot of running around and shooting and sub-Hong Kong stuff, but it's okay. I liked it more at the time, but it's a solid 6 out of 10, 6, 7 out of 10. It's pretty good. David Arnold's first film as a Bond composer as well. He does a good job of getting the James Bond sound, so quite like this one. Next one, number 15, we are up to Doc to Know. We've started at the first James Bond film. What can you say about this? looking back now, obviously there's elements that are dated, but it starts a revolution in cinema, revolution in franchise cinema, and inspires a lot of filmmakers who want to make popular box office films of action and adventure. So what's probably interesting with this one, pardon me, is it has a couple of things. It doesn't have the pre-credit sequence. It has the gun barrel, but there's no pre-credit sequence. It has a sort of a theme tune, and it has the James Bond theme, but it doesn't really have a theme song. It doesn't have a vocal theme song. After that, it kind of follows the formula. It's got one of the most famous introductions in cinema of the James Bond character. It's an amazing, iconic moment. The word iconic is overused in film and in life. Don't overuse it, but the appearance of James Bond, played by Sean Connery for the first time, is iconic. Connery's very good in this. He gets better as his films go along. But I think one of the important things with this film, with the casting of Connery, is Connery's from an impoverished background. He's from a working class background. I think that's quite important that the actor who plays James Bond is not from a posh background, because James Bond, although he's privileged, is an orphan. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and that needs to come through in the character. And none of the actors who play James Bond are from wealthy backgrounds. Some of them are not necessarily poor. Like you might assume Roger Moore is from, he's like Roger Moore, but he is, his dad was just a local bobby. He was brought up in, I forget which area of London, but it's a modest upbringing. Sean Connery slept in a chest of drawers when he was a kid. He was so poor in Edinburgh. So it's an amazing story, Sean Connery's story, to go from where he came from to what he did become, which is basically he was the biggest box office star for a time in the 1960s. I think he's the biggest film star this country's ever produced. Giant of the box office and a giant of film stars for me. But anyway, back to Dr. No, introduces the concept of the villain. Dr. No's got metal hands, played by the actor Joseph Wiseman, a New York stage actor, very good. Ursula Andress, again, one of the most iconic scenes in cinema history. Honey Child Rider comes out of Honey Rider, to give it a name in the film, comes out of the sea. She's got the amazing bikini and a knife. She's actually dubbed. Her acting's, it's okay. She just, she looks. You can't you see exotic images routinely now. We can go on Facebook today and or Instagram, there'll be someone doing an exotic look abroad or something like that. But back then, what it must have seemed like her appearance, God knows. My father went to see this with his mum. The glamour the film brought with those locations. People, we go all over the world now. Part of the reason we're in the current situation we're in is because we go all over the world. That's why this virus we're currently experiencing has spread. It could be a plot from a James Bond film, isn't that mad? It is. We'll come to that. Oh, the irony. But we live in a globalised world. Back then, people didn't. So when, Sean Connery goes to Jamaica, that looks amazing. In actual fact, there's a little family referencing. My father worked for Standard Triumph in the 60s, and he went out to Jamaica back in the 1960s because Standard Triumph had cars out there, and they would go out. He'd go out as a rep / troubleshooter. If there was problems with the cars, he would go and sort out the problems. With some of the mechanical issues. And there's a guy in Dr. No he was a bit part actor kind of guy out in Jamaica. I forget the name of him. He wears glasses, and he's one of the guys Bond meets, and who goes to the club that Professor Strangways goes to. And that guy was actually worked for Standard Triumph or something like that, or he was to do with the cars out there. And my dad actually met him. And that's a weird little connection there. First time I saw this film, I know I'm waffling on, but anyway, that's why I'm doing this, because I like waffling on about films. I saw this, probably the UK premiere, it was November 1975, I believe. November 1975, important time in my life. Doctor No premiere, Bohemian Rhapsody #1, two things coming together, music and film. I was just instantly smitten with the James Bond character. I was hooked there from there on in. I think this is the first James Bond film I saw. So, you know, it's a really important film. It's about a 7 out of 10. It's not great because the budget's too low, and it just hasn't established a formula totally. But there's a lot of good things on this. Probably for me, the best bit, that's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6. Connery properly gives it a hardcore Silence of Death on Strangways. Probably the grittiest scene ever in a James Bond film. Don't forget, James Bond is a killer, licensed to kill, and Connery captures that perfectly in that scene. It's the 18th highest grossing James Bond film, $655 million. That's kind of tied. So a very successful film at the time, and it led to the franchise. Carrying on. The next film, number 14, it is, can you guess what it is? Got a license to kill. But if you listen to the phrasing on the lyrics on the song, it almost like she says killed, Gladys Knight. Got a license to kill. Anyway, interesting one this. Went to see this at the Pictures back in 1989. It was actually the last film I went to the Pictures to see with my mates back home in Cumbria. So, you know, when I was a kid, I'd go to the Pictures with my mates from school. At that time, I wasn't at school. I was in Newcastle by then. But I remember going to see this with a few friends. I didn't like it at the time. It wasn't Bonding enough. I'll go through the sort of elements, but I'll tell you how I feel about it now. Actually watched it on video a couple of years later. My flatmate was raving about it and watched it again. Kind of liked it more. But anyway, I think this film starts poorly. I think the pre-credit sequence isn't very good. It sets up the plot fine. It's just not very exciting. The stunt's pretty lame. He kind of hooks the drug baron's plane and that. And there's some bad stunt doubling. Should say it's Timothy Dalton's second film as well. Then it has the song, really like the song License to Kill. It's basically a reworking of Goldfinger. Narada Michael Warden produces it. It's got Slick H's production. I love Gladys Knight. She's got a great voice. It's not a classic James Bond theme, but it's in the classic style. So that's quite nice. Then the film starts properly. It's established a plot, and it just starts to get better for me. Timothy Dalton in his second film, he's good. We'll talk about Dalton more when he appears again. But there was criticism at the time because he goes rogue. The original title of this film in America was License Revoked. That got pulled because it was felt that Americans wouldn't know what the word revoked meant. And that's what happens at Hemingway's house in Key Largo. M says, your license to kill is revoked, Mr. Bond. It is a great line. He goes, we're not a country club 007. What's weird now is James Bond goes rogue in just about everything. Like, he's fairly rogue in Casino Royale. He definitely goes rogue in Quantum of Solace. He's kind of roguing up a bit in Skyfall. And he's certainly rogue in Spectre. You know, it's just weird how, like, the Timothy Dalton era is ahead of its time, and in that respect it is. Good villain in this, Fran Sanchez, really evil villain. There's a bit where he puts a guy in a anti-Zerb, Milton Crest, the character, and he puts him in a decompression chamber and blats him, and it's really horrible. And that's really why this film got a 15 certificate, and that's one of its problems, why its box office was weak. One of the reasons, plus the competition at the time when it was released, it went up against Lethal Weapon 2 and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, to name but a couple of films. I love the bit with the trucks at the end. I think the truck chase is great. Timothy Dalton, he gets given a cigarette lighter at the start by Felix Leiter, who's getting married, and it's from him and his wife. And the final kiss off is brilliant. He goes to the Sanchez character, who's got a massive machete and is covered in petrol. He goes, "Don't you want to know why?" And then he gets a cigarette lighter and he sees it, and Sanchez realises who he is, why he's gone on this vendetta, and he basically ignites him. The truck bit's really cool. It's ridiculous, but they're really well staged. There's a good bit where he basically wrecks all the drugs and goes up in a plane. Quite an exciting bit. Some good underwater sequences with this. Some great sardonic liners, compliments from Sharkey. When he kills people, Dalton, he really means it. The sort of whole it's filmed in Mexico, but it's kind of fictional country or state. Quite like the whole thing with the drugs front with the Professor Joe. He's like a TV evangelist. There's a lot of good elements. Once you get the pre-credit sequence out of the way, the 3-act structure's good on this film. Musical score's not great, but it's okay. Dalton is finding his Bond. There's still problems with it, but Daniel Craig's benefited from it, and Pierce Brosnan, and Timothy Dalton's owed quite a lot for bringing James Bond down to earth and putting some serious elements into it. So I like this film. It's a solid 7 out of 10. It's the lowest grossing James Bond film after inflation. It always was 362 million if you release it now, 24. Basically, its US box office gross was too low. Its worldwide gross in other countries, there just wasn't a massive interest. I think people didn't really take to Dalton. I think the poster and advertising and the title of the film was poor, and it suffered for it. But it's one of the better James Bond films. Next one up, number 13, The Living Daylights, Timothy Dalton's first foray into James Bond. Here's something I want you to do. You don't like Timothy Dalton, you love Daniel